Artemis stands ready. Ready to turn dreams into reality. Ready to return humanity to the moon and take us further than ever before. The culmination of inspiration and innovation, of Herculean efforts and steadfast collaboration, Artemis I is ready for departure. And the Artemis generation is about to leave its mark.
What will be a journey of more than 500,000 miles to the moon and back starts right here at Launch Complex 39 Bravo. Although this first flight will not carry a crew, it will test every system in the deep depths of space to prepare the way for future crewed missions.
When the final go is given and the teams at Kennedy Space Center release this rocket, Artemis will roar to life and we will witness the beginning of a tightly choreographed mission.
All engine 1, 2, 1, and liftoff.
The first 2.5 minutes lift Artemis off Earth and build momentum. It's another 6 minutes of pressing uphill, accelerating to orbit. This is followed by a push from the second stage to raise Orion higher.
And once all the systems are cleared to continue, the second stage will fire again and push Orion beyond the bounds of Earth. At this point, we're going to the moon. It'll take several days to reach our destination, but as we sprint across the void, many new procedures and systems will be tested and proven.
240,000 miles later, Orion will enter an oval-shaped orbit around the moon, one that will take Orion to about 60 miles above the lunar surface and then out to 40,000 miles beyond the moon. This is a distance farther than any human-rated spacecraft has ever gone before.
As momentous as reaching the moon will be, returning to Earth is just as significant and challenging. Every observation we make, every lesson we learn on this journey prepares the way for humans to safely venture out and return home. And so on its final lap around the moon, Orion will ignite its main engine, push out of lunar orbit, and begin the long trek home.
This is a spacecraft built for the harsh conditions of deep space, as well as the intensity of returning home. Nearing Earth, Orion separates from the main power and propulsion systems of the European Service Module and prepares for the final sequence of events. Entering Earth's atmosphere at 24,500 miles per hour, the heat shield endures the fury of re-entry. The air around Orion reaches temperatures half as hot as the sun, but also slows Orion considerably. Until finally, parachutes can deploy, allowing Orion to gently dip into the Pacific Ocean.
To the moon and safely home again. This is the journey of Artemis I, and it will set the precedent for all that follows. United with partners around the world, this is the challenge we choose. To meet hand in hand, step by step, lighting the way from the Earth to the moon, to Mars, and beyond. We are ready.
Artemis I is paving the way for us to explore deeper and deeper into space.
I think Artemis I is significant on so many levels. It is a new frontier to do science.
So the primary objective is to test the Orion spacecraft integrated with a space launch system.
And it is designed to carry out the boldest of the bold missions.
But it's more than just learning how to travel in space. We're taking a lot of cool science along with us on this first mission to the moon.
So as NASA plans to go back to the surface of the moon and then onto Mars,
we want to spend more time there, and that's riskier business. So the more we learn about the moon itself and the environment where we'll be operating, the better we can prepare. We have 10 CubeSats we call secondary payloads, which are small scientific spacecraft of their own that will each be conducting their own scientific mission.
All of these payloads in some form or fashion will help us going forward. They are going to be studying the moon.
And they're going to help us understand what is the moon made out of, what types of rocks, what types of regolith, what types of ice, what's mixed in with water that might be present.
One of them actually is going to attempt to land on the moon. They're going to be studying the sun.
Understanding and studying the space environment or the space weather.
Some different propulsion systems. These novel ideas will ultimately turn into the technology and the systems that we want to use going forward.
There's a lot of cool things going on between all these CubeSats that make up our secondary payloads. Additionally, inside the Orion, we'll be flying an experiment to study space biology.
Space biology is where we study the underlying changes that Earth-based biological systems undergo when they're in space.
Or basically, how does life respond to the space environment?
The level of ionizing radiation that you experience when you go beyond the Van Allen belt, so you go beyond the protective magnetic sphere that we have around us, you then get exposed to higher levels of ionizing radiation. So we are flying several space biology experiments.
We will take a series of materials,
plant seeds, fungi, the yeast cell, algae,
and ride along the trip. And then when it comes home, we can analyze how they responded to that environment.
This research will help us thrive in space. It will help us to go further and stay there longer.
In addition to space biology, we'll be learning about how to make astronauts more effective in the Orion in the future. An example of that is something called the Callisto Technology Demonstration.
Lockheed Martin built the Orion spacecraft for NASA, and we'll be flying a secondary payload that's a demonstration payload called Callisto. So we took the technology from Amazon for Alexa and the WebEx technology from Cisco, and so we built a digital assistant, if you will, a custom space-qualified Alexa.
Alexa, how does the life support system work?
Orion's life support system is the environmental control and life support system works.
And so this payload is a demonstration mission to show how astronauts in the future could use this technology as an innovative user interface.
So there you have it. I hope you agree with me. This is exciting.
I am just over the moon excited for the Artemis I launch.
The science we'll conduct on Artemis I lays the groundwork to ensure that we can safely conduct scientific activities at the moon with our astronauts going forward. This really is the stepping stone for us as we take that next giant leap in space exploration.
Artemis is NASA's plan to go back to the moon, and Snoopy is to be the zero gravity indicator.
A zero-G or zero gravity indicator demonstrates the moment that the crew in the spacecraft reach weightlessness.
Snoopy is about to take his first trip around the moon.
The relationship with NASA and Snoopy goes back about 50 years since the Apollo days.
He was the face of the safety campaign,
the icon for NASA's culture of safety and mission success. So NASA and Peanuts have a Space Act agreement.
And we collaborate together on STEM content. And we really were excited when it was decided that Snoopy would be the zero gravity indicator on Artemis I. We wanted to go all out, so we created a custom Snoopy.
And the spacesuit is actually made out of material worn by the NASA astronauts.
Everything was done with extreme detail. They cut patterns for his suit, even how his collar worked and how the NASA Meatball logo looked.
We're very excited. I'm personally very excited.
I can't contain the excitement I am feeling about this day. Snoopy is going farther in space than he's ever been before.
This is a day that we've all been waiting for. It's fantastic.
Through Artemis, the twin sister of Apollo, we are returning to the moon. This is Orion, the only human-rated spacecraft in the world capable of deep space travel. And now, the Space Launch System, NASA's most powerful rocket since the Apollo era, stands ready. Having undergone and passed numerous tests, the time has come to complete the journey. With hardware originating from every state in the nation and from partners around the world, Artemis I will be the first flight test of each of these components now assembled together. These two solid rocket boosters will provide more than 75% of the thrust necessary to leave Earth. Each booster stands 17 stories tall, a full segment more powerful than the SRBs of Shuttle. Together, these boosters are capable of 7.2 million pounds of thrust and will burn for the first 2 minutes of flight. The core stage, at 212 feet, is the tallest rocket stage NASA has ever built. With the rocket's flight computer secured inside, the core stage is designed to hold 2.3 million pounds of fuel. The 196,000 gallons of liquid oxygen and the 537,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen will combine to provide 8.5 minutes of propellant to the 4 massive RS-25 engines mounted below. As proven workhorses of the shuttle fleet, each RS-25 engine has a legacy all its own. Together, these 4 engines provide 2 million pounds of thrust, and with the SRBs, are capable of pushing Orion to a speed of 17,000 miles per hour. The interim cryogenic propulsion stage is a 45-foot tall upper stage that offers Orion nearly 25,000 pounds of thrust. Performing 2 separate burns, the ICPS will first raise Orion's orbit and then, later, propel it out on a trajectory to the moon. The ICPS is powered by a single RL-10 engine that will perform these 2 burns. This storied engine has propelled robotic missions to every planet in the solar system, including Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, the first space probes to reach interstellar space. Orion's service module, provided by the European Space Agency, is the powerhouse that fuels and propels Orion in space. It stores the spacecraft's propulsion, thermal control, electrical power, and critical life support systems, such as water, oxygen, and nitrogen. Orion's crew module is the pressurized segment of the spacecraft, where future crews will live and work on journeys to the moon. Capable of accommodating 4 crew members for up to 21 days, this capsule includes state-of-the-art avionics, innovative crew systems, and the largest heat shield of its kind for entry back into the Earth's atmosphere. Positioned at the top of Orion is the Launch Abort System, designed to pull the crew to safety in the event of an emergency, on the pad or during launch. 3 solid rocket motors can activate in milliseconds, accelerating from 0 to 500 miles per hour in 2 seconds to propel Orion and crew safely away from the rocket. Now fully assembled, Artemis I stands at 322 feet. Artemis is no longer a series of separate parts and programs. United together, this is the first of Artemis's arrows, capable of ushering in the next chapter of human lunar exploration. Only together, this mighty system represents all that is possible, all that we are capable of when united around a stunning vision, with each component playing its part in a grander effort. We, the people of NASA and our partners, we, the people of the Artemis generation all around this beautiful world, will bear witness to what we are capable of. Together, we are going back to the moon.
This is really cool. We got some children that are on a bus, and they're going to come here to the vehicle assembly building, and the administrator and I are going to jump on the bus and surprise them.
We're going to give them the opportunity to come in and go up the elevator with the rocket.
It's so cool! Hello! Look at that thing! Whoa, that's awesome!
Hey guys, would you like to see a moon rocket? Because it is the future of our country, indeed the future of the world. And we saw what our space program does for science and technology and engineering and mathematics. We saw that in the Apollo generation.
All right, guys, what do you think? What I hope to achieve today is inspiring a new generation. I mean, the more people that we can get to see up close and personal this rocket, it's awe-inspiring. And I cannot wait till the launch. When America sees our rocket actually launch on a test flight to the moon, you know, it's just going to spark a whole new push for what we are doing.
Best day of my whole life ever. It's gonna be incredible. It was a dream come true.
This rocket is definitely going to the moon.
I think it's really amazing.
And I was actually really excited because I've never seen a rocket like this close up.
Now we have the Artemis generation. This is a new generation of us going back to the moon to learn and live, and then we're going to Mars. Across the nation are sacred sites that capture the spirit of America's character. And one of those places is right here, the Kennedy Space Center.
Every single vehicle that has carried humans beyond the bounds of low Earth orbit has undergone integration and testing in that vehicle assembly building, crawled down this roadway and launched right here from the Kennedy Space Center. The Space Launch System, mated with the Orion spacecraft, will continue this proud tradition.
As soon as we roll out of the vehicle assembly building, High Bay 3, and the world gets a chance to see this rocket, I think it is going to be shocking.
On March 17th, NASA took a giant step toward returning humanity to the moon. The fully assembled Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft for the Artemis I mission made its debut outside the massive vehicle assembly building.
We've seen the mobile launcher outside, and it's massive, but now add an over 300-foot rocket on top of it, it's just going to be amazing.
Charlie Blackwell Thompson oversees the launch countdown, ultimately providing the go for launch.
Entity, launch director, representing this team and all the men and women that have worked to make this day happen, I proudly give you a go to roll the Artemis launch vehicle to the pad.
Ladies and gentlemen, the world's most powerful rocket right here.
Once outside, the rocket began its nearly 4-mile journey to the pad, riding atop a 6.6 million pound crawler transporter, which was originally constructed to transport the Apollo moon rocket.
In 1 year, we have completely stacked the vehicle. We've completed most of our testing, all very successful, and we are so close to launch, and the excitement is just crazy.
Now NASA's new moon rocket is making the same journey the Saturn V took 50 years ago.
And just as all eyes are on the SLS tonight as it makes its journey, in a few short weeks, all eyes are going to be on the sky as it rocks the space coast and takes its maiden flight around the moon.
It is amazing to see the culmination of all of this work of many years from many industries and many people that have come and go, to have a chance to then now see their work going over to the pad and then launching to go to the moon.
The rocket is rolling to historic Launch Complex 39B, its launch pad used for both Apollo and shuttle launches, sending hundreds of astronauts to space throughout the decades, and now on tap to send hundreds more as we return to the moon and venture beyond to Mars. But for this mission, there will be no astronauts on board. Before the uncrewed Artemis I stack can launch to our nearest celestial body, it has to travel to the pad for a wet dress rehearsal, a test to run the rocket, capsule, launch team, and launch pad through their paces, simulating a launch countdown.
When we get to the pad team will be connecting all the interfaces between the pad and the mobile launcher so that we can go ahead and start our operations at the pad. So at that point, the launch director really takes over, and she will go down the sequence as if it was really a normal launch day.
Wet dress rehearsal is essentially launch without a launch. It is to really, the reason we're doing it is to verify and validate all of the pieces that go into launch countdown. So wet dress is really our opportunity to find any issues or adjustments that we need to make in our launch countdown.
For Artemis I, the wet dress rehearsal is the final and most critical test before the rocket can return to the launch pad for liftoff to the moon. During the countdown, over 730,000 gallons of supercooled liquid propellants will be loaded into the rocket as part of the nearly 2-day launch countdown.
We will configure all of the ground systems exactly the way we would for launch, and we will fully load the core stage and the interim cryopropulsion stage with their liquid fuels. That'll be the first time that that's been done from here at Kennedy Space Center. There have been pieces of these things done in multiple different areas. We've tested all of these systems in multiple different locations, but this will be the first time where we pull it all together and do all of it all in the same progression that we've got laid out for Launch Countdown.
Wet dress is the biggest milestone we have aside from launch, because that means that the rocket is now put together, has been tested separately and together, and it is ready to go and be filled with fuel to simulate how we're going to do it at the pad, and then it tells us the rocket is ready to go for launch.
And behind that wet dress rehearsal is a launch team made up of hundreds of engineers monitoring each system of the 320-foot-tall Artemis I rocket and capsule. Sitting in firing room 1 is the core launch control team, monitoring hundreds of launch commit criteria to ensure the ground systems and flight hardware are ready for launch.
Now you would think that launch control team in Firing Room 1 is it, that's all you need. We have an expansive support team across really the entire NASA enterprise that is supporting us on launch day.
And that support spans the entire nation, from additional systems engineers sitting in Kennedy's Firing Room 2, to the flight control team at Johnson Space Center in Houston, to the contractors responsible for designing and building each segment of the rocket and capsule.
This team is really shaping up to be a great, very skilled and ready to operate and execute launch for Artemis I.
With the Artemis I launch team now fully certified and the wet dress rehearsal complete, SLS and Orion are ready for their final pit stop, returning to the VAB before venturing back to Launch Pad 39B for liftoff.
I mean, we are going and we're going together, and we're having an opportunity to do this in a new generation of space exploration in which I can say that I'm honorably a part of.
You know, you come every day to the VAB and you see the rocket and you can't believe what we have accomplished.
People throughout history have always explored, and you never know what you're going to learn.
Exploration is not always about the destination, but it's the path that you travel, the things you learn along the way.
And the things we're going to learn are going to be incredible. We can't even begin to understand what those are today.
Our workforce has been a relentless spirit. We imagine, we build, we never stop pushing the envelope of what is possible.
What an exciting day at the Kennedy Space Center. You can see the Orion spaceship coming out of the ONC building where we've been assembling it for several years. As big a step as this is for us today in rolling out and starting the journey of Artemis I to the moon and beyond, we're really excited for this test program to get this vehicle flowing and to begin the next steps, which are to send humans back to the moon.
The twin sister of Apollo, Artemis is the name given to the program that will return humanity to the moon. And named after one of the largest constellations in the sky, Orion is the spacecraft destined to get us there. Through Artemis missions, NASA will land the first woman and the first person of color on the lunar surface. And these missions will allow us to explore more of the moon than ever before, paving the way for long-term presence in lunar orbit.
We're rolling the Orion spacecraft out, but it's beginning its journey. We're really kind of at the end of the building process and the beginning of getting ready to go fly.
But before Orion can travel to our nearest celestial body, it must first make a few pit stops along the way to fuel up and get ready for flight.
As we leave here today, we're going to go to a facility that'll fuel the spacecraft with the rocket fuels and propellants it needs. We'll put a launch abort system on. We'll send it out to be stacked in the rocket and launched. And it's really the last few yards of the game.
Orion's journey to the moon began on the bayou. NASA's Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans is where technicians with Lockheed Martin began welding the pieces of the spacecraft's underlying aluminum structure together. 1 year later, it arrived in Florida, taking up semi-permanent residence inside the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Engineers and technicians will spend the next years working almost around the clock, outfitting Orion with thousands of components and pushing the capsule through several rounds of rigorous testing as teams prepare for its flight around the moon. The first step, though, is the crew module's arrival.
When the crew module shows up here at the ONC building, it's really just a welded shell of the structure. When it gets here, we put it into a fixture called the bird cage tool, and we use that fixture to position and attach all of the mechanically attached primary and secondary structure for the crew module.
Part of that includes the heat shield, which protects the crew module as it blazes through Earth's atmosphere at astonishing speed as it returns home. Technicians with Lockheed bond those thermal protection system products onto the heat shield right here in the ONC. And they do the same for the crew module's forward bay cover.
We bond that on here, and basically this covers the forward bay of the crew module, such that once we come back into the atmosphere, this gets jettisoned and all of the landing system, i.e. parachutes, get deployed and slow the crew module down so that when it touches down in the ocean, it's only going a few miles an hour.
With the primary and secondary structures all attached, the crew module is tested to see how everything holds up. Orion is pressurized, stressing the welds to ensure they'll hold up under the proper loading. Afterwards, non-destructive evaluation of those welds is conducted to check for any voids or cracks. Once the structure is deemed strong enough, the crew module is moved just a few spaces down into the ONC's clean room for its next round of integrations.
We bring that structure into our clean room, which is you see behind me, because we need to start integrating the propulsion system and elements of the environmental control and life support subsystems, and those systems require a cleaner environment than the one we're standing in out here.
When all of that is done, the crew module is on the move again to the crew module integration station. There, all of the electrical systems, including wire harnesses and avionics boxes that control the crew module's guidance, navigation, communications, and its power subsystems, are integrated. Next, it's time to bring the spacecraft to life.
We power it up, And then we go into a whole series of functional tests to make sure all the subsystems that we've integrated up to that point are functioning properly.
But the crew module isn't the only thing that makes up the Orion spacecraft.
All the people, the work, the components that have gone into this vehicle, it's just an amazing feat.
Teams also worked closely with the European Space Agency to build the service module, the element that will power Orion on its journey around the moon. Once that arrives, from Bremen, Germany, Lockheed moves forward with integrating the two.
The service module has a very similar life cycle to the crew module. We build it up structurally, we integrate the propulsion system and the other fluid systems, and then we integrate it electrically and power it up and do functional tests on it. And when we have a full service module and a full crew module, then we stack the two together and we have what's called the crew service module for Artemis I.
Under the Artemis program, NASA plans to not only return to the moon, but to use that as a stepping stone to go farther than any human has ever gone before, Mars. To get there, it's truly a cross-country and international effort among thousands of individuals.
When you consider all the people, at the Johnson Space Center, Marshall Space Flight Center, all across the agency, SLS, Orion, the European Service Module, Boeing and their team, Lockheed Martin and their team, and to see all of that come together on that launch when we send it on its way to the moon, it's going to be absolutely amazing, and we're going to have a lot of really proud, happy people.
Building a spacecraft destined for deep space exploration from the ground up is no easy task. And the fact that these teams have been able to come together and do just that in the midst of a global pandemic is nothing short of amazing.
It really is a testament to the workforce. If you think about what we've been through over the years that they've been putting this together, and particularly think about the environment that this team was dealing with. We're dealing with COVID, and we're asking these folks to come into work every day and finish the spacecraft so we can keep this mission going. And we're ready, and we're excited. And so as they turn this over to us, we're ready to get going.
And really, this is only the start of Orion's path to the pad.
It's a little hard to put into words when you think about the fact that we are in the first flow of what will be our nation's deep space exploration program. It hits you in the heart, and it really speaks to why we all are doing what we're doing.
I never thought as a little kid growing up I'd be part of something like this today. Now as a dad of two young girls, to be able to tell them what I do and to be able to have them someday watch the first woman stand on the moon is pretty amazing to me personally.
As the Orion spacecraft departs the O&C, its next stop is the Multi-Payload Processing Facility, or MPPF, where teams with NASA's Exploration Ground Systems and prime contractor Jacobs will perform the next set of milestones, fueling and servicing the spacecraft.
We have a few months of hard but rewarding work ahead of us to get to launch, but this is it. This is our year. This is our time and what folks have worked so hard for.
Now we're going to continue with processing, get that thing checked out, fueled, get the launch abort motor stuck on top of it.
With fueling of Orion's crew and service modules complete, the spacecraft moves from the MPPF into the Launch Abort System facility.
We just finished fueling the spaceship, and we moved it to the LASA facility, the Launch Abort System facility, to put the Launch Abort System on the top of Orion.
And in July 2019, teams completed a critical test, the Ascent Abort 2 flight test, to validate the Launch Abort System works as expected. After reaching an altitude of about 6 miles, where the test spacecraft experienced high-stress conditions expected during launch, the abort sequence triggered. Within milliseconds, the abort motor fired to pull the crew module away to safety. Its attitude control motor flipped the capsule into the proper orientation, and the jettison motor fired to release the crew module for a splashdown in the Atlantic Ocean.
I feel, just honored and humbled every day to be able to work on this stuff.
This rocket is just going to be absolutely amazing.
Now that the spacecraft's launch abort system is securely in place, Orion is ready for the next stop on its path to the pad, the Vehicle Assembly Building. Once inside, the spacecraft will be placed on top of the Space Launch System rocket, the most powerful rocket the world has ever seen.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for More than 50 years ago, NASA's Apollo program sent humans to the moon with less computing power than is in your mobile phone. Since then, technology has transformed space exploration. We've landed rovers on Mars and sent robotic explorers to the outer reaches of our solar system. Now, we're ready to send humans into space again, starting at the place we know best, the moon, where we're going to stay and learn as much as possible as we forge a human path deeper into space than ever before. Artemis is NASA's program to return humans to the moon for long-term exploration. It is named after the Greek goddess, who is Apollo's twin sister. The Artemis missions will take us to the moon's south pole, a region that's rich in natural resources and geologic features that will help us answer fundamental questions about the history of our moon, Earth, and solar system. On this season of NASA Explorers, you'll meet the scientists, engineers, technicians, and astronauts of Artemis. These are the people who are designing science investigations, analyzing grains of moon dust in the lab, building tools for lunar exploration, and training to conduct science on the surface of the moon.
Yes, so my job title is now astronaut, NASA astronaut. What first interested me and the first time I kind of said that I wanted to be an astronaut, I was around 9 years old. I was doing an after-school curricular program at Judy Resnick Elementary School. And I think I asked my parents about who she was and what her career path was. And I think that was the first time that it was explained to me that, hey, you could go to space and hang out there as a career option. So I think that was kind of the first time I said, that sounds awesome. That's really what I'd like to do. I had done some kind of summer program type of classes. One thing that sticks out in my head was dissecting a cow eye, and I came home and was just raving about how cool that was, and it was so fun. And I think my parents looked at me kind of funny, but I think that was kind of the beginning of my interest and love in science, and really wanting to dive into research and asking questions.
Before becoming an astronaut, Dr. Jessica Watkins worked as a planetary geologist. As a member of the science team behind NASA's Curiosity rover, her work focused on Mars. Now, Jessica is working aboard the International Space Station and is one of the Artemis astronauts and rare human beings who may get to leave their footprints on the moon.
In that moment, there is a whole team of hundreds of people that have contributed, probably thousands of people, that have contributed to that reality. And, the kind of the last piece of it is, the human in the loop that's actually executing it. But in reality, it will just be about representing the rest of that team well and doing your job, your one piece of that puzzle well.
Dr. Julie Mitchell represents another piece of the Artemis puzzle: sample processing and storage. When Artemis astronauts deliver the next set of moon samples to Earth, they'll need to be stored in a specifically designed facility and preserved for current and future generations.
My main title is the Curator of Ices and Organics. All that means is that I'm helping NASA get ready to bring ice samples back from the solar system. So I work in what's called the Astromaterials Acquisition and Curation Office. We just call it the Curation Office for short. So all of the Apollo moon rocks, meteorites, all of our sample return missions from asteroids, from comets, all of those samples come here to Houston, and it's our office's job to take care of those samples and make sure that they're available to the scientific community to study. So I grew up in Louisiana on the bayou. I was down at the water all the time looking for snakes and turtles and looking at different plants that were out there. Nighttime would come around and, I was just looking at the stars. I wanted to know the constellations. I wanted to understand what was going on up there. And neither of my parents went to college. None of my siblings or I had any expectation of going to college either. My older sister, she actually ended up going to college, eventually got her PhD. She just gave me a hard time and just kind of was very persistent with me and saying, look, just apply to one school. Luckily, I got in. And when I got in, that was kind of the switch that flipped, like, oh, okay, I can actually do this. And I want as many people as possible to know that there are people who are working at NASA who, didn't grow up with a lot of resources and have still found a way to make a contribution.
Okay, so how does a kid that comes from a rough part of Lima, it gets interested into science? Of course, I was very curious and I was very motivated for science. I don't think I would have gotten into science if it wasn't because kind of need that I had for achieving something great.
Dr. Jose Aponte works in the Astrobiology Analytical Laboratory at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. He studies grains of dust from meteorites, asteroids, and the moon, hunting for microscopic clues to help answer a gigantic question. Where did the seeds of life come from? Jose could be among the first humans to study samples from the moon's south pole.
I read an advertisement that read, "We're looking for an astrobiologist to study organic compounds in meteorites." Astrobiologist? What's that? I never heard that word before. I had no clue, honestly. So I read about it and I said, wow, this is pretty cool. Organic compounds in meteorites? Meteorites, okay, that sounds exciting. So when I was a kid, I was probably 10 years old. And every day I had to do the dishes at home. And there was this pot, and this pot had a really thick black layer of burnt rice. Something came to mind, and I said, okay, if I want to clean this pot, I'm gonna add bleach, because bleach, dissolves tough stains and should help. So I add a couple of cups of bleach. Look at it. Nothing happened, of course. So I said, okay, nothing happened, such a disappointment. I decided to add a cup of muriatic acid that is used to clean toilets. And then you know what happens? You know, right? Okay, so when you mix bleach and muriatic acid, chlorine gas is released, but in great quantities, a lot of it, really fast, really quick. And so I add the muriatic acid and I see a lot of fumes coming out. So I left the pot there and ran upstairs and tell my grandparents, we gotta leave the house because we're gonna die if we don't. When we came back, the pot was all destroyed. I was like, what happened? That was great, that was crazy. I don't know what it was, but that was cool. That's the first time I think that there was a chemist, although I didn't know that I was a chemist at that time.
I definitely am a person that doesn't give up. I don't take no for an answer. And as soon as I got to school, really I guess the summer after my freshman year, I was applying for anything space related. Unfortunately, I was unsuccessful many times. I've counted up and the number that I remember from that exercise was about 30 to 35 different applications over a few year period of just nothing. And then the second semester of my junior year of college, I was accepted to a NASA internship. And so sure enough, that broke the barrier for me. I got an internship that led to another internship. Now I'm here and get to living out my dream. I wear a lot of different hats here at NASA, but my primary role right now is as the Deputy Project Manager for the Artemis geology tools. That means that along with our project manager, I help to lead a team of people who are building moon tools. And so specifically the tools that are going to take samples of the moon and bring them back to Earth so the scientists can study them for generations to come. I watched the Apollo videos many times and I see the video of the world reacting to that accomplishment, and I just feel so much pride, and knowing that I get to be a part of it this time around is just, it's so much fun. It makes every day just seem like a dream.
Together, Jessica, Julie, Jose, and Adam are pieces of the Artemis puzzle. Each is a vital component of the team working to accomplish the monumental task of exploring a world beyond Earth.
You can't just do this with a geologist, or you couldn't just do this with an engineer. You really need a mix of people to think about these challenges from all the different angles. And we have that team.
These are our explorers, the people who will get us to the moon, collect moon rocks, deliver them to Earth safely, and ensure that we can study them for years to come.
by the time we get to the moon, we're going to have the best tools. We're going to have the best containers. We're going to have the best crew. And that's because everybody involved really, really cares. And all of that is going to lead us to the very best science we can do. Everybody's hard work ahead of time will make sure that we have these excellent samples and that they're preserved for the long term.
Virtually everyone on Earth knows the first words uttered from the surface of the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
But not many people know that the next words were all about science.
It's fine and powdery. I can pick it up loosely with my toe. It does adhere in fine layers, like powdered charcoal.
On the next episode of NASA Explores Moon Rocks, what mysteries about the origins of our Earth, Moon, and solar system can we unlock from a rock?
So I do remember the first time I held a moon sample. It was in a course at undergraduate level.
I remember being in school and a scientist came and gave a talk, and he actually brought a lunar meteorite.
And at this point he put what we call a thin section, so we could look down the microscope at them. A thin section is actually a piece of rock that's been sliced, about the same thickness as a piece of hair. You can shine light through it and you can look at all the different minerals that are in the rock.
So they're actual meteorites that fall on Earth that are made of pieces of the moon. I remember holding this piece of a lunar meteorite. It was pretty small, and I remember thinking, wow, this is so small. We really need more of this. I remember that was my number one thought, was we need more of this. We need a lot more.
I went home and I think I rang every single person I knew. I definitely told my family a million times. I don't think they were sick of me, but like they would definitely go away and tell us something different now. But no, they weren't. They were over the moon as me. Pun intended. Yeah.
For the past 50 years and counting, generations of scientists like Dr. Natalie Curran have been probing rocks brought back by Apollo astronauts using increasingly sophisticated technologies. We've learned that our moon is so closely related to Earth that the two must have formed from some of the same material. Moon rocks showed the first evidence that the moon has water, and they've even helped in studying the history of the sun, which influenced the evolution of life.
I work in the Mid-Atlantic Noble Gas Research Lab, or MNGRL. You know, we're called Moon Girl Lab because we work with lunar samples, but it's actually a fun name because we're actually predominantly female scientists that work in there. We are looking at basically the history of lunar samples, and being in this lab, we're basically rock detectives. So we're looking at how old the sample is and what the sample's made of. The reason why we want to answer these questions is because they can tell us a lot about how not only this sample formed, but also how the moon formed, or what the geological processes are that are occurring on the surface of the moon.
So working with the Apollo samples, I honestly try to take the emotion out of my lab work. It's very humbling. It goes over my head, you know, to have a piece of the moon in my hands. I study the origins of organic matter in space.
Organic matter is what makes up all life on Earth. Dr. Jose Aponte and his colleagues are trying to figure out how the chemical ingredients for life got to Earth, and whether they ended up on any other planets or moons. Although there was never life on the moon, it's an important place to study as a record of the events, such as asteroid collisions, that shaped the solar system. Rocks on the moon are better preserved and far older than any rocks we found on Earth.
My job is integrating science into human spaceflight. So how will we do science on the surface of other planets with astronauts? We like to say that the moon is a witness plate for the solar system, and it's really true. When you look at our planet here on Earth, you see, things that we all really like a lot, like vegetation and the oceans and, cities where people live. But all of these things combined with the fact that our planet is actually very active, just look at plate tectonics, which creates new crust, which destroys old crust. It's, again, what drives our planet and the evolution of our planet. These are all things that we're very appreciative of and see every day, but they're things that actually obscure the geologic record. When you go to the surface of the moon, however, you have 4+ billion years of history preserved on the surface of the moon. By looking at one rock, you can learn a lot, just by using your own 2 eyes to interrogate a rock and make descriptions about it. You can learn something about how that rock got there, how the landscape around you got there, and you can start to really make broad interpretations about the area around you just by looking at literally one rock. Then imagine taking that rock back to a lab which you can use these really high resolution lab techniques that we have to peer inside the rock, get a look at what you can't see with the naked eye, start to understand just how old that rock is, how long it's been sitting there on the surface.
So it's really exciting to think that this some small little sample can tell us a lot about different processes that are not just going on from the local region where this sample was picked up, but actually from the whole of the moon as well.
By studying just one rock, you can learn about potentially billions of years of solar system history. And so imagine the scientific discoveries that we made with the couple 100 pounds of rocks we brought back from the Apollo missions.
During 6 missions from 1969 to 1972, Apollo astronauts brought back 842 pounds of rocks, pebbles, sand, and dust from the moon. Today, those samples are carefully stored in a special facility at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. The same facility will store the rocks to be collected by Artemis astronauts.
So I work in what's called the Astromaterials Acquisition and Curation Office. We just call it the Curation Office for short. So all of the Apollo moon rocks, meteorites, all of our sample return missions from asteroids, from comets, all of those samples come here to Houston, and it's our office's job to take care of those samples and make sure that they're available to the scientific community to study.
The Apollo astronauts all landed near the moon's equator. Samples from there have been instrumental to science. But scientists want to explore other locations on the moon. Otherwise, it would be like landing in the Arizona desert on Earth, and assuming that the conditions discovered there reflect those found on the entire planet. Compared with Apollo, Artemis astronauts will carry out a very different mission in a drastically different environment. They will venture to the South Pole, a region that has water ice and could be rich in other resources. The South Pole is a land of extremes. Temperatures there can reach negative 400 degrees Fahrenheit.
I would actually even say curation starts as soon as the mission starts. So one of the things that I'm talking to the EVA engineers about a lot and the astronauts is how to prepare for when they're going to go to the moon. For example, we know that we're going to collect some rocks. What container are we going to put those rocks in? Are we going to put them in a can? Are we going to put them in a bag? And we need to understand that, because for some of these samples, they are very sensitive to whether they're exposed to metal or plastic. And those are design decisions that have to be made years before the mission even flies.
They've got to be super strict, the astronauts on the surface. But me, I'd be like, I'd be like a kid in a candy store and just want to, I don't know, I want to take everything. And, you can only go a certain amount of time. I'd probably run out of oxygen, me. I'd be walking and forget.
It's often said that, exploration is part of human nature, and I definitely agree with that. I mean, even as a small kid, going out in my backyard and, picking up dirt and sticking my hands in the creek and understanding what the little animals and plants were all around me was something that, I didn't have taught to me by that age. It's just something that really comes naturally to, I think, most people. And the same is true on a much bigger scale. The desire to explore the solar system and learn more about, what we can look up in the night sky and see is really a fundamental part of human nature.
If we want to visit Mars, if we want to explore the solar system, or if we think about going to other planets, we first must learn how to operate on the moon.
Getting ready to conduct science on the moon and to identify scientifically interesting features takes a lot of practice. On the next NASA Explorers, Space School, how is NASA preparing astronauts to think and act like geologists?
As an aquanaut, that was just an awesome experience, definitely once in a lifetime, to be able to go spend 9 days about 60 feet below the surface in an underwater habitat.
And we would do a full end-to-end mission scenario, simulating the moon or Mars. That's where we really got to put to the test, what is exploration of these planetary bodies going to look like?
So when we have these, what we call aquanauts, living in this underwater habitat, we can simulate some of the conditions that the astronauts will experience. And we're actually able to have these aquanauts conduct EVAs, or extravehicular activities, simply put, spacewalks, outside of this habitat.
So really being able to see that process from multiple different angles, I think will be really beneficial as we start to nail down exactly what that's going to look like for Artemis.
Artemis is taking humans for the first time to the moon's South Pole region. This area of the moon features some of the coldest temperatures in the solar system. Artemis astronauts will look for signs of frozen water and gather clues about the young solar system, when the planets and moons were just forming.
Flash forward to astronauts exploring the lunar surface with the Artemis program. They're going to be doing exploration. They're going to be visiting a site on the moon that no human being has ever visited before. And they're going to be taking pictures and describing rocks that they see, collecting samples, deploying instruments. And we want to, have them experience all of these things here on Earth, of course, before they fly to the moon.
NASA has been training astronauts in geology and geoscience for decades. These scientific fields help us understand the evolution of the physical and chemical makeup of planets and moons. From their deep interiors to their surfaces and atmospheres, Apollo astronauts had hundreds of hours of training in geology, or the equivalent of a master's degree, and Artemis astronauts will too. NASA's astronaut corps includes geologists, like astronaut Jessica Watkins.
Yes, so my job title is now astronaut, NASA astronaut. We all come into the astronaut office with, a whole career in the rearview mirror in a lot of senses. For me, the way that I ended up kind of sitting in this seat was by keeping it in the back of my mind. So I became interested in Mars at a pretty young age, actually. I'm not sure, somewhere around 5th grade. So this was in a defining time for my life. But I remember for some school project, making a book about Marty the Martian. That love kind of carried through in college when I found geology, because I learned that there's this thing called planetary geology, and the idea of being able to study the surface of another planet was just the coolest thing to me as somebody who loved Mars.
Geology training on our home planet covers just one aspect of what it would be like to scientifically explore the moon. Lower gravity, extreme temperatures, and a bulky spacesuit make operating tools and collecting rocks a great challenge. NASA scientists and engineers work hard to design and build custom tools that will work well in the extreme environment of the moon's South Polar region.
Making any sort of hardware that flies in space is a huge team effort. I help to lead a team of people who are building moon tools. And so specifically the tools that are going to take samples of the moon and bring them back to Earth so the scientists can study them for generations to come.
At Johnson Space Center, we have what's called the Rock Yard, which is essentially kind of a large open space where we've imported rocks, basically a human-sized sandbox. It's great.
At the Rock Yard, we get astronauts to come out to be test subjects, but we also get engineers and scientists and operators to be test subjects as well, so that we can fully understand what it's like to be in that crew perspective.
So understanding, what our priorities are, what types of rocks we're interested in and why, but also to start using the tools that we'll be using to collect those samples.
Let's just start with the most simple tool, the geology hammer. You all know what a hammer looks like, but in the South Pole, it's going to be really cold there. And so we need to make sure that we're using a material that doesn't break at very cold temperatures. So we create a test plan that includes putting it through environmental testing, so putting the tools in very hot conditions and very cold conditions and making sure they work. We can't just go to the hardware store and buy a hammer. We have to go make a special one. And then we have testing like ergonomic testing to make sure that it actually works with the astronauts and that it fits their gloved hand when they're in the spacesuit. It's not too exhausting for them. There's all of these little different nuances of being in the spacesuit that are hard to fully appreciate unless you get in there.
As anyone who's worn a spacesuit will tell you, it feels like wearing a balloon that's constantly pushing down on you. Spacesuits have to meet many demands. They must be sturdy enough to keep astronauts safe in the low gravity and high radiation environment of the moon, but they also have to be nimble enough to allow astronauts to squeeze, poke, and pound their tools.
It's tough to describe, honestly. It's large, it's about 300 pounds, I think. You're kind of operating your own personal spacecraft in a lot of ways. The intent is for you to be able to manipulate your arms and legs in a way that you would on the ground. So we have a large pool here at the NBL, the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory here on site. In the corner, we now have a moon area. So we've imported sand and rocks down there, and we've started to do runs trying to approximate 1/6 gravity. It's kind of a lot of moving pieces, but it's really fun. It's one of the coolest things we get to do.
And I'll tell you what, some of my most favorite, moments at NASA have been when I see these engineers start to get excited about the science that we're doing and start to, learn some of the geology terminology, because that really is what creates an effective team. And so hearing, tools engineer Adam Nade start to say, wow, this looks like a basalt that has lots of vesicles with olivine phenocryst in it, just make me incredibly excited, because it means that, we're learning to speak each other's languages.
There you go. I just like to do weird and unique things. So I've always found those, those odd hobbies like learning to juggle or learning to beatbox or do improv. I was watching TV and I saw the TV show American Ninja Warrior, and I was just like, I want to do that. And so I started to train to be a ninja warrior. That's how I decided that I should be called the Space Ninja. And so I would just share my interest of space. I got selected and got to go out there and compete.
So I think we would limit ourselves if we only have one vision of what exploration looks like. Being a part of the NASA team has really showed me what that means and what exploration really looks like on a daily basis. But I do enjoy creative writing, short stories, poems sometimes. When I can find the time, it's just an enjoyable way for me to explore what I'm thinking and feeling, and really kind of use the other side of my brain.
Yeah, whenever I take a step back to think about what I do, it is surreal, and it's thrilling, and realize that I have a leadership role in this too, and I get to influence what we're gonna do on the moon.
For me, I think why it is so important for us as humans to explore is that exploration kind of forces us to push ourselves to the limits of our capacities. I think that's really important for us to do so that we can, find those boundaries and push them forward. See what's out there, see what we're made of, see what the universe is made of, and where we fit into it.
The moon's south pole is an ideal location for many reasons. One reason is that we've collected more information about this region of the moon than any other, from a NASA Earth that's been circling the moon for more than a decade. On the next episode of NASA Explorers, why the South Pole? What remaining questions do scientists have about the moon and solar system? And how will going to the South Pole help answer those questions?
imagine if you were an alien who, was visiting the Earth for the first time from some other galaxy. Imagine only visiting the United States and never visiting any other part of the Earth's surface. That's essentially what we've done with the Apollo missions. Really been able to do wonderful and groundbreaking science with the samples, collected during the Apollo missions. But again, we visited only a very small part of the lunar surface.
The way that I think about it is it's the equivalent of landing on Earth and getting rocks from Kansas. It would give us insight into one particular location on the Earth, but not at all the diversity of what we see on the Earth, what we know is present on the Earth. So the ability to go to a different site, a different location, get different samples will just enrich what we've already learned from our Apollo samples.
There's a lot left to be learned about the moon, and it starts with the South Pole.
Artemis astronauts will fulfill a different mission in a unique environment. While the Apollo astronauts who visited the moon's surface between 1969 and 1972 landed near the equator, Artemis astronauts will venture to the moon's South Pole region. Frigid, rugged, and with unique light and darkness conditions that make it an ideal location for exploration. The South Pole region is also home to the rim of the moon's largest, oldest, and deepest crater, called South Pole Aitken. It takes up almost a quarter of the moon, and is so deep it exposes portions of the moon's interior.
Yeah, the South Pole it's fascinating. There are some very unique types of rocks that are at the South Pole that will allow us to understand the entire history, not just of the moon, but potentially of the solar system.
Very early on in lunar history, we think that there was this increased period or very intense period of huge material hitting the surface of the moon, creating these really large craters or like giant holes, which we actually call basins. So getting a sample of impact melt from this basin would kind of help us bracket that early period of time.
The moon's South Pole region has resources that are vital for long-term exploration. Because the moon is barely tilted relative to the sun hovers over the horizon at the South Pole. Imagine a flashlight turned on, laying on a table. That's how the sun illuminates the South Pole. Light at the South Pole strikes at such a low angle, it brushes only areas of higher elevation, such as crater rims. These locations have sunlight for extended periods of time to harness for power. At the same time, the bottoms of some deep craters are shrouded in constant darkness. Scientists have measured the coldest temperatures in the solar system inside these craters, which have become known as perfect environments for preserving water for eons.
Over time, there's individual molecules of water and carbon dioxide and other gases that actually bounce around the surface of the moon. And when they get to one of these cold spots, they actually get stuck. So we call those places cold traps. And if you do that for millions and even billions of years, you can actually build up a pretty significant deposit of water and other ices.
From an exploration perspective, if we can understand just how much water there is and where it is and how to get it out of the regolith of the moon, we can turn it into really important things like drinking water for astronauts and even rocket fuel to take them back home. So really understanding these resources and how to use them is one of the objectives of the Artemis program, and it's what makes the South Pole of the moon so exciting.
We know the moon in incredible detail, thanks in large part to NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, or LRO. LRO has been circling the moon since 2009. It's the longest-lived spacecraft there. Through tens of thousands of orbits and data from 7 instruments, LRO has mapped the moon's temperature, geology, radiation environment, and is providing insight on how the moon is changing over time. LRO is led by Dr. Noah Petro, a planetary geologist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center.
LRO is this incredible mission. It was launched in 2009 as the opportunity to go back to the moon, to create this three-dimensional, high-resolution, high-definition atlas of the moon. Where are there safe landing sites for human and robotic explorers? So what LRO is doing is really giving us the tools, the material, the data we need to make those missions successful.
For many years, LRO's elliptical orbit was closest to the moon during the spacecraft's pass over the South Pole. So scientists have more information about the South Pole region than any other region of the moon.
We know that we can do more and build upon the legacy of Apollo, but to do that we needed a higher resolution data set. We wanted to know where the hazards were. We wanted to know where the geologic features were that we want to go explore, and so LRO has created that database. Incidentally, the LRO data volume is now over 1.3 petabytes. It's the largest volume of data that NASA has ever collected from any planetary body. It's remarkable. And what we've done now in support of Artemis, in support of other NASA missions to the moon, is we've created special maps. We share them with the public and we share them with the various engineers and scientists who are going to help enact and make Artemis a reality.
You know, this is basically a Google Maps of the moon, taken from pictures from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter camera, and you can just zoom in and see a 5-meter boulder on the surface of the moon. That's just crazy. I could spend all day, and I have spent all day sometimes just browsing around different parts of the moon, just looking at rocks.
This wealth of information will make it easier to find ideal locations for a NASA base camp, and to quickly identify scientifically interesting areas to visit nearby.
So it's my real belief that we have an opportunity with Artemis to do something different than Apollo. We build on Apollo, we learn from Apollo, but we want to expand what Apollo was able to do and build this presence on the moon that is more than just 3 days, more than just 6 individual missions, but a much larger program that eventually will result in the ability to go onto Mars.
Mars is quite a bit longer away from our own planet than, of course, the moon is. It takes several months in some cases to get to Mars, and it's therefore going to be really critical when we have astronauts walking around on the surface of Mars to be able to stay there for longer periods of time. You've just spent 6 or so months to get there. You want to really be able to explore the surface around you, and having the ability to live off the land and know how to conduct exploration for longer periods of time is going to be critical for Martian exploration, and lessons learned for that sustainable type of exploration start right here at the moon.
So there's still so much for us to learn from going back to the moon from a scientific perspective. It's a no-brainer in my head. So with Mars in the horizon as our kind of end goal, this is an important step for us to take. And then also just kind of from a human aspect, we all have this kind of intrinsic desire to explore. I think it's in all of us and certainly in us as a society. And so I think setting our sights on something and accomplishing this goal together is really important, just for international relations, for just coming together as a humankind, the human spirit. I think that's a piece of what we're doing that we can't ignore as well.
I have 3 kids, aged 10, 6, and 2. I talk about space often with them. The great thing that my parents did for me was let me find my path. I also look at my daughter and I think, okay, Amelia, she keeps saying she wants to be a firefighter, a construction worker, and an astronaut. And I say, well, Amelia, you can do all 3 and be an astronaut. Well, when you're an astronaut, you got to learn how to fight a fire in space. You got to learn how to build stuff. So you got to do all those things. What they'll become, I'm so excited to find out. But I have no idea what they're gonna end up gravitating towards.
So why is the moon my favorite body to study? I think growing up, you could always see it in the sky. You could see some beautiful stars and maybe Mars or Jupiter as like small little dots, but the moon is just there in all its glory. It's like our nearest and dearest neighbor, and you can even with the naked eye, you could start picking out features on the moon. I think that was really cool. This is thousands of miles away, and you can still kind of be a geologist from the ground if you want to. And I think that's really cool. And that's why I always wanted to study the moon. Just seeing people walk on the moon, on this foreign planetary body, looking at images like the one behind me here, I think that always blows my mind.
I will say with my 2-year-old, what I have noticed recently, and this is wonderful, is that when he sees the moon, we're out for a walk, we're driving around, or outside a window, we go, moon, moon. And just the fact that he can look up and see, go, oh, moon, moon, that makes me so happy.
Moon to explore, and we're going to the moon for scientific discovery.
Our destiny is always to go and see what's further and what's next.
The moon is a stepping stone, and the moon is a place we need to learn how to live so that we can continue to go beyond.
We are focused. We are focused on all that lies before us. Only together will we bring to life this global ambition of returning to the moon. And while our work is far from finished, we've never been closer to seeing a new generation step beyond our home planet. We are building on the achievements of those who came before. The giants who conquered gravity and raised a banner in the heavens. They beckon us to go farther, to the moon and on to Mars, to seek a deeper understanding of our universe and bring all that we learn home. 2020 was a year of unpredictable hardships, and yet, step by step, we resolve to press forward toward this grand vision. The daily efforts of thousands of suppliers from all across this country and around the world fed into stunning milestones and laid the groundwork for history.
Launch team, go.
Artemis has been woven into our culture. It has fostered collaboration across the aisles and across the ponds. It has grown beyond plans and preparations to include hardware and software. And now, it has a heartbeat. You can feel the momentum. It is undeniable. We are going. And together, we will see Artemis light the way.
Our mission to the moon is no longer some far-fetched dream. This is reality. We are going.
This is the next step in evolution.
They're not just PowerPoint slides. They're actually metals being bent, shaped, formed to build the things that we're going to use.
This is real. This is going to happen. We're going.
We are going to the moon to learn how to live on other planets for the benefit of all.
Let's go.